And talk about that tradition of critical thinking, which is called ijtihad. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And what happened to Islam's golden age? When did things begin to go wrong?
Right. Ijtihad is Islam's own tradition of critical thinking, independent reasoning, debate, and dissent. And I want to acknowledge that this word, ijtihad, sounds frighteningly like jihad to many non-Arab. It comes from the same root, to struggle. But unlike any notion of violent struggle, ijtihad is all about struggling with the mind in order to comprehend the wider world. And far from being mere theory, ijtihad as a tradition has a great track record within Islam. You know, in the early centuries of the religion, thanks to the spirit of ijtihad, 135 schools of interpretation flourished. In Muslim Spain, scholars would teach their students to abandon, expert opinion about the Quran if their own conversations with the fluid and ambiguous Quran came up with better evidence for their ideas. And get this, in some of the more sophisticated cities of Muslim Spain 1,000 years ago, there were 70 libraries. Well, that rivals the number of libraries in most cosmopolitan cities today. So the question you rightly ask is, what then happened? Why did it go wrong? I talk about this in the book and in the film, that, about 1,000 years ago, something absolutely catastrophic happened in the world of Islam. The gates of ijtihad, or the doors of independent thinking, were closed for entirely political reasons. But precisely because those reasons were political, Daljit, not spiritual, not religious, but political, there is absolutely no heresy or blasphemy in seeking to revive this tradition of critical thinking, which is what I and other reform-minded Muslims are seeking
and
to
how
do
you seek to revive it in the face of absolutism?
Right.
And when you're talking about the problems that Islam has, or at least the way that you see them, I mean, are we talking about the entire faith, or are we talking about particular communities? Are we talking about interpretations of Islam, or rather misinterpretations of Islam?
Well, actually, we're talking about all of that at once, because certainly there are peace-loving Muslims in the world. So we're not talking about every Muslim being an extremist. But here's a very key point to make, that too many peace-loving Muslims are still silent about the abuses of power that are being committed by the extremists. That's why I make the crucial distinction between moderate Muslims who are relatively silent and reform-minded Muslims who are not silent at all. And so you ask, well, what can be done in the face of extremism and absolutism?
But why do you think that the moderate Muslims are not speaking up? I mean, more and more are speaking up, but it's obviously a very difficult thing for them to do within their own communities, because
you know why?
They don't want to be cast out. They kind of carry baggage around with them. And
that is exactly right, Daljit, and it is one word that summarizes this phenomenon, and that is fear. That's why I call this documentary Faith Without Fear. People are so afraid, Muslims are so afraid of being ostracized, stigmatized, marginalized, and sometimes even physically damaged as a result of speaking out within their own communities. I want to tell you a very quick story, and it relates right back to this documentary. You know, when PBS put me and my mother on a bit of a publicity tour for the film, they sent us to, of all places, Detroit, which of course is the lion's den, the highest proportion of, Arab Americans in the country. And I was condemned and heavily pilloried during the screening of the film there. But afterwards, at the reception, we noticed, my mother and I, a number of young Arab Americans, gathering in the corner. And after all of the TV cameras and microphones were gone, they approached my mother to say, "Thank you for supporting your daughter. We support her too." And my mother said to them, "Well, wait a minute. Why are you saying this now? Why didn't you say this in front of the cameras when other reform-minded Muslims know that you exist?" And they said, "Mrs. Manji, you don't understand. You have the luxury of being able to walk away from this theater 2 hours from now, but we don't. And we can't afford to be accused by our own families of dishonoring them for supporting Irshad's perspective."
When you're talking about reforming Islam, I mean, who are you aiming your message at, essentially? Is it radical Muslims or is it moderate Muslims? I mean, it seems that you have as big an issue with moderate Muslims as you do with the extreme radical fringe.
Right. It's a great question, and you're right. I have absolutely addressed my book to moderate Muslims and why they must start speaking out in greater numbers if we are going to be able to reclaim the good name of Islam. But I can also tell you that women in particular, all over the Muslim world, are flocking to this message. And because, you know, at the end of the day, women have the least to lose and the most to gain from serious reform. We also know that there are wonderful heroines within Islam whose lives have been buried in the teachings of Islam today. And so by bringing out the role of women more, I think that we can finally begin to restore the humanity and reason to the practice of Islam that once very much
So in some ways you see women as being the linchpin
I
of
think they're
reform.
the key. I do believe that they're the key.
Why?
Well, again, because they have the least to lose and the most to gain. They're also, of course, more than 50% of the population. And let's face it, any time you don't use the talents of such a huge proportion of your own community, you are going to suffer. And so is the potential for success within your community.
Okay, Irshad Manji, thank you very much for coming on the program.
God bless. Thanks.